Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to The Cutting Room, the show where we talk to industry-leading content marketers and learn about their process, pregame, and philosophy as it relates to content marketing. I am your host, Tommy Walker, and thank you so much for coming on today. Today, I am very excited to have our guest on. He is Brian Clark from Copyblogger, the CEO of Copyblogger, former CEO of Copyblogger, founder of Copyblogger, one of the many people who was a huge influence for content marketers of a whole generation of content marketers, myself included. And now he is currently doing further.net, which is amazing. And he's also doing Unemployable, which is for a freelance website or freelance writers to have a lot of resources around that and become a better freelance writer. I'm going to just invite Brian onto the show. I want to welcome everybody as well to introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us a little bit about where you're from. And feel free to plug your website while we're doing that. And we're just going to get started. Brian, invited to the show. Looking forward to this. Brian, what's up, man?
Tommy, how are you, man? It's been a long time.
No kidding. No kidding. I'm very excited to have you on. I was just thinking about this today, how there was this entire first generation of like modern content marketers that came from the Copyblogger camp, specifically like Third Tribe. Like I think about where everybody's career from Third Tribe went, and it's absolutely incredible to see like this whole cohort of people just come up and like get started with the stuff that you guys were doing.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. You know, that was Copyblogger launched in 2006. It was about content marketing, except we didn't call it that because content marketing didn't have a name for a couple more years. And on the flip side of that, I'd been doing it since 98, you know, just making it up as I went along and noting what worked. But yeah, that's it's weird to reflect on that time. Like you said, a lot of people that came along with us on the ride are just immensely successful now, and I would include you in that, which is probably my proudest accomplishment. I mean, we did build a pretty major business out of it. We did sell it, all that good stuff. But now I look and there's a whole generation of younger people who you don't have to tell. Like back in the day, you had to convince people this is what works. This
Right.
is digital marketing, right? Content is what works. Now that's just accepted as
Right.
gospel. And then you've just got these really badass writers, right? And
Yeah.
that is, you know, if I had any part in that, then I'm happy.
The whole form, like I remember people like Derek Halpern and Lewis Howes, like Lewis Howes being like a massive success nowadays. Like
I know.
there's a bunch of well-known people in the space
Michael
who like
Stelzner and the whole, I
Michael.
remember when
Oh my
he
god.
came to me with the idea for Social Media Examiner. He was writing for Copyblogger from the beginning. He's like, do you think this is going to work? And I'm like, absolutely, it's going to work. Right. And he's had amazing success.
It's so cool.
Laura Roeder. I mean,
Yep.
so many people. It's I sometimes try to reflect on all the names I can think of. And then I realize I'm too old to remember all that. But it's good to see that so many people, they were in our community, you know, that we were all a bunch of people, you know, including Chris Brogan, Darren Rouse, the OGs, they call us. But yeah, it's just so cool to see really that people don't need us anymore. But, you know, we
Right.
try to stay relevant.
Well, I've talked to a few people. Like I had, and we're going to be editing Aaron's article tonight, which, yay, that's a challenge. But I was talking to him recently about this and how it's like there are several generations of content marketing groups, like content marketing cohorts, and like
Sure.
seeing the next like people from that era, like having like people who learn from that group. It's really interesting to see, and I love this sort of genesis of how it all started. And having been there for that, it's a really, really cool thing to have witnessed this entire time.
Without a doubt.
Let's jump straight into the questions here. Regular viewers here know that I don't like a whole lot of preamble. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy on content marketing and the role that it can play in the growth of a business.
Yeah, that is a fascinating question to me in particular, because when, a lot of people know my backstory. I was an attorney. I was very unhappy at it, kind of quit, without a real plan or a safety net. And I wanted to be a writer. I was a liberal arts major with a law degree. I practiced law for 4 years in a big law firm setting. So I didn't know anything about business. I had never read a marketing book. Um, but once I went out on my own and decided I'm going to make a living writing somehow, I wasn't really drawn to New York publishing or Los Angeles screenwriting, even though I did study screenwriting before I studied copywriting.
Oh, really? I didn't know
And
that.
yeah, and it all came down to I have to ask these people for permission, these gatekeepers.
Yep.
They're going to tell me if I'm good enough. And I have an ornery side to me that has mellowed over the years. It helps getting a bit older and having kind of accomplished your goals. But at the same time, I still don't want to ask anyone if I can do this or that. And the internet back in the late 90s represented this Wild West frontier where I could publish stuff and didn't have to ask anyone's permission. And that was really the genesis of my, oh, yeah, but you do have a whole bunch of people to answer to, and that's the audience. And once you get your mindset there that you're serving others, and by giving those people what they want, you get what you want, then an entrepreneur was born. And I think really that I didn't have a traditional marketing background kind of helped, because a lot of people who were really well versed in corporate marketing or traditional direct marketing really struggled with the internet, because it kind of turned some things that were taken as gospel on their head, and people had trouble letting go. I had nothing to let go of. And so, really, the only adversity in the early days, which was also opportunity, was there were no courses, there was no, conferences. Now we almost have too much information, and you have to figure
Right.
out who's telling you the truth and who knows what they're talking about, blah, blah, blah. But back then you had to look at what other people were doing. You had to experiment, and you figured it out. And to some degree, I think that will always be true. Except now you can learn the fundamentals very quickly from people who've been there, done that. And I think programs like this immensely helpful for getting people off the ground.
Oh,
But yeah, I've started over a dozen businesses in the last 24 years, and every one of them started with content, and most of them didn't have something to sell. The early businesses were in traditional service markets like law and real estate, right? Those were the first three businesses. But once I got to Copyblogger, the audience came first, and then you discovered the product through the process. And I still can't remember to this day if I coined the phrase audience first or not. It doesn't matter. But again, like I said, it's been such a long time now, and these things have become just part of the vernacular of our industry, that it doesn't really matter. If you were there during the early days, then you played a part in creating what we have today. It's kind of what you alluded to earlier.
I think that's really cool. There are a few things that have come to mind here. I, I don't know if you know this, but I came from a conservatory. I went to an acting conservatory before I ever got into marketing, and a lot of that background played a lot into how I think about my whole philosophy on content and programmatic and having a narrative between article to article and things like that. Couple things that come to mind. First of all, what would you say your screenwriting background uh, played into the actual creation of the content? But then the other part of that, and it's kind of a separate question, but how much of being in Gen X um, influenced this sort of doing it yourself, like Wild West frontier attitude?
Ooh, that's a whole bunch of questions in one question.
I
What you
know. Sorry.
said, That's okay. What you just said, tying back to your acting background, the narrative that continues from article to article, or as I like to say, you're telling a story over time, piece by piece, and it doesn't have to be articles. Obviously, it can be a mix of content modalities to do this. And some people get that. And I think the people who got it early, like you, had some sort of storytelling background, whether it be um, writing novels, writing screenplays, or at least studying the art of that and understanding that if you're not actively telling people a story, then they're already telling a story to themselves anyway. Now, the part of my background that seemed very low ROI, but turned out to be just beautifully indispensable was I was a psychology major and a sociology minor. So basically, I trained in how people think and how they think in crowds. And then I built a business at the beginning of mainstream social media. That's not a coincidence, right? I was perfectly trained for that. Mom, it all paid off. Imagine, first of all, your mom's like, what are you going to do with those degrees? And I'm like, I'm probably going to go to graduate school or something. And she's like, well, you're paying for that yourself. And I did. And then I go to law school. I was the first, person in my family to go to college. So then going to law school and then doing well and getting a great job and all that. And then calling your mom up and saying, Mom, I'm quitting my job to write on the internet. It didn't go over well, but it honestly was all perfect. You can always say that in hindsight, right? At the time, you're like, I just knew that I couldn't live my whole life being unhappy. And I know too many lawyers to this day that even who I practiced with back then, that, every time they see me, they're like, man, I'm glad you got out. I'm just like, why didn't you if you feel that way? But it's
Right.
hard. It's hard to give up what you've been trained for that pays really well. Unfortunately, too many people are in that boat. And I just feel blessed that I took the step off when I could.
I don't know a single content marketer and I want to hear from the audience on this one who started with this traditional marketing background. I don't know I don't know anybody, right? Um, I think some of the people I know, they started off as either a professor or they were an actor or a journalist or any of these other areas where it was a level of persuasiveness. And I think what's interesting about your background here, especially talking about, how do people think? How do people think in groups? And then the lawyering aspect of it, there's a lot of persuasiveness,
Yeah.
right? It's all persuasion and groupthink and all of that. How
It's
is that?
interesting as a copywriter. Sorry, just wanted
Oh,
to
go ahead.
point out to that my writing style is heavily influenced by legal writing, and I was always more floral and loose and storyteller than my bosses liked in the legal setting. Even though modern legal writing, it's encouraged to be that way, so I was ahead of my time there. But as a copywriter, sometimes I struggle to inject enough of the emotional aspect, right? So I'm mindful of that. I can be rigorously rational and logical, and you need that component, but it can't be the whole thing. Um, so anyway, that was just an aside to that training. It definitely comes through. Anything I'm writing, I'm making a case to you. I don't write if I don't have a case to make, I don't write it, because what's the point?
I love that. What's that actually leads perfectly into the next sort of section of the show, which is tell me a little bit about your process when it comes to planning either the stuff you're going to publish or the stuff you're going to write.
Yeah, that did end up being a good segue. I've been struggling to write an article for one of our membership sites for the last couple days, and I know generally what it's about and what I'm trying to say, but I didn't have the structure. Before I can sit down and write even a first draft, I have to understand the structure of the argument or the structure of the case I'm trying to make. And I couldn't get it. I couldn't get there. Now, this flies in the face of a lot of traditional writing advice, which says just sit down and start typing and write a crappy first draft and all this kind of stuff. I can't do that. I hate that. I hate to write anything down that's crap. Um, but I work it out in my head. And if I can't work out what I'm trying to say overall, structurally and persuasively, then I can't start. And right before we went on the air, I had a phone call that made me almost late. But before that, I found it. I found the structure and I'm sitting there typing out the outline. And then I look at the clock and then the phone rings and I'm like, oh, okay. That figures, right? You always get inspiration right when it's not convenient. But yeah, that's my thing. So they tell you don't stay inside your head. That's the opposite of me. Just start writing. No, I won't do that. But once I get it worked out structurally and generally inside my head, then I sit down and it comes out pretty quickly, which will happen after we get off of this call.
So there's a question that I keep asking people, and I think you sort of alluded to this. Are you a planner or a pantser? Right? Are you planning your articles out ahead of time, or are you like outlining and sort of planning out those beats, right? Because you're doing a lot of the structuring in your head.
Right.
Or are you really figuring out the structure in your head and then taking that and putting it out on the paper? Because I know, like, I personally I'll do exactly what you're talking about, which is structuring it in my head, but then I write the article here before I write the article in real life.
Yeah. So yeah, we're the same then. What was the second term you used? There's planner and then
planner and pantser.
Pantser?
Yeah. Yeah. Flying by the seat of your pants.
Oh, I think it's both though, right? Except that you're flying by the seat of your pants in your head. In again, whenever inspiration arrives, instead of necessarily being very, I just wish I was one of those people who just sat down and they just bam, 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 bam. It's never worked out that way for me. It's interesting because I guess if you say I have a mentor, it would be Seth Godin. And I once asked him, I'm like, what's your writing process? And he goes, Brian, I'm not going to tell you because number one, you'll think I'm a crazy person. And number two, it doesn't matter what I do. It matters what you do. And I tell people my craziness, but I thought that was pretty on point. I mean, don't look to someone else's process too much because odds are it may be completely wrong for you. And you will think what some of your favorite writers are crazy. But if you didn't think that already, I mean, are you even a writer? Come on.
And that's primarily the reason why I wanted to do this show, is that it's like you get as many perspectives as you can on that, and knowing that
pick and choose, take what
exactly
works. Yeah,
exactly. And it's funny, Rand Fishkin was on the show,
right? I saw that one. It was great.
Thanks. And he was talking about how his process is very similar to just letting things percolate and then kind of going from beat to beat and discovering the article as it's going along. Does that sound about right? Or are you kind of, how's that look for you? Like once you get it structured,
I
and then you
think
start putting it down.
The concept of serendipity is very important to me, and it's a real thing because it's not just blind luck; it's informed luck. Meaning, you do the work up front to work things through, like we talked about, and then you sit down and you structure it, and you start writing what you know needs to be there, and then you'll take a break, and you'll read something completely random, completely off topic. And it's the perfect little anecdote or metaphor or what have you, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what I mean by serendipity. When you're ready for the to add nuance and flourish and the things that make a piece of writing special as opposed to just information, when you're ready to receive it, there it is. But that's really just a function of really thinking deeply about your work and really thinking about how can I communicate this better than what I think is necessary, I guess would be a good way to put it. Like, again, information is not what people want. People want advice, they want inspiration, they want epiphany. And that often comes through the little details as opposed to a recitation of just facts and data. And, everyone wants solid data and statistics and backup and reliable foundation for the content, but it's really in the way that you express it, which I think is the empathy of the job and understanding your audience. Because, for Rand's audience, it may be a certain approach that is best for them. That's not the same for my audience. And that's the difference between Rand and I in the way we write. That, both people can write, but there's no right way necessarily. There's no objectively right way. It's all subjective based on who you're writing for. And again, that's important. You as the writer are only important to the point that you connect with your audience on their level where they need to be. It took me a long time to do that. Mentioning the Gen X thing earlier, I don't know. We are kind of headstrong, resilient. We were left to our own devices as children. It wasn't Leave It to Beaver. Mom was off at work. So that may have some part of it. I don't know. I haven't thought about it in that context. But I will say that now when I choose how to write to a particular audience, like the audience at Further, I'm very strategic about the references I make and the metaphors and stories I tell to make sure that they connect with that audience. When I started Copyblogger, in the name of authenticity, which was such the buzz phrase at that point, I told the stories and made the references and whatnot that were meaningful to me as a Gen Xer. So I'm writing articles, making, content marketing metaphors that refer to Prince, Depeche Mode,
Right.
back in this is funny because at the time I actually caught flack for this because I was one of the first people, I guess, at least in the blogging space, to use pop culture references and metaphors like in the headline. Like that was the theme of the piece. And then people saw that was going viral. And back in those days, a lot of things did. And they started doing it similarly. Some people did it well, but most people did it really badly. And I literally got blamed. They're like, this is the Copyblogger effect. All these people writing these terrible. I'm like, I didn't tell them to suck. In fact, I told them not to suck. You can't blame me for this. It's a lot of fun. And that was why I attracted an audience of a lot of Gen Xers who, it's funny if you do a survey of the Copyblogger audience, they skew towards my age group. Well, that makes sense, right? They've been there all along.
See, I ask about Gen X because I'm an elder millennial and I'm jealous that I'm not actually
You're
Gen
right
X.
on the cusp. We'll
I'm
draft
right
you
on
in.
the cusp.
My
All
business
right, cool.
partner Jared is an elder millennial, and I drafted him in Gen X, so we could do the same with you.
Perfect. All right, I'll get my honorary card. So there's a whole bunch of jumping off points here. We've got reflecting your audience. Something that okay, so Praveen Kumar was on a couple weeks ago, and he was from Shopify, and one of the things he talked about that I thought was really interesting was he has a sticky note on his monitor that says "Nobody cares."
Nice,
right?
Yeah,
I thought that was neat as it like relates to the sort of process and planning part of it. Um, how so let's zoom out just a little bit more. And when you're going into the planning process of everything, like not just the individual piece, which we're talking about in the weeds, but zooming out and what you're going to talk about more broadly, tell me what that process looks like.
I love that sticky, and I totally get it. I have that sticky on my monitor, but it's only when Twitter is open in my browser, and I just go, don't tweet that, right? Nobody cares. So you're asking my process for making sure that the content that I intend to put out is relevant to the audience. I mean, is that what you're getting
Yeah.
at, or?
Yeah, zooming out and like planning the overall arc of the things that you're going to be talking about. Are you doing, I guess a better question would be, is are you doing things piece by piece, or are you kind of looking at things and going, here's what the calendar is going to look like. These are the things I generally have an idea of what I want to talk about.
Yeah. Back in the Copyblogger days, we're a very small team now of only 3 people, but we got up to 65 people before. And you had to coordinate keeping people up to speed, even though it's a very dynamic environment where things change a lot. But yeah, Sonia and I would generally know what the story arc was for the next 6 months, generally because we launched a new product every single year, right? So it
Mm,
was a very exciting kind of thing. And frankly, it's what kept me going because, you know, I think about 2008, I was already like, man, I didn't think I'd be still doing this. That was only 2 years into it. Things had really only got started. But that's how we kept it interesting was new products, new launches, and whatnot. Um, so we have the buyer's journey is a term of art and often tied to the hero's journey. And through various iterations, I've tried to map that kind of very closely to Joseph Campbell's monomyth. Other times, or I should say now, I think it's just more important to realize that the the prospect, the audience member is the hero, not you. You're the mentor. The mentor is a form of hero, like Obi Wan Kenobi is a hero, but he's not the hero. That's Luke Skywalker, right? And I just kind of leave it there because no one cares gets solved if you understand that you're the mentor and you know stuff that this person needs to know. And then you've got to figure it out. If you're going to be a good mentor, what do you need to tell them? And in what order? And, the one aspect of the traditional hero's journey that I think is relevant is resistance to the call. The reason
mm,
why they won't even try to solve their problem or satisfy their desire. That's a real hump, right? So you have to know. And for the last few years since we sold Studio Press and Rainmaker, I focused on teaching content marketing strategy, which to me is the same thing as starting a business strategy, because again, that's how I start businesses. And and it's really all about putting yourself in that position and then going, okay, I have to really understand this person, or there's no way I can get them across the finish line. I have to know what their version of success looks like. And every touch point and milestone along the way, including points of resistance, um, you know, times when they're going to feel frustrated, all of this stuff, it's not an exact science, obviously, but the better you can create a portrait of your audience member as a unifying group, right? Again, so you're dealing in archetypes or characters or what have you, but everything that these people have in common, you have to identify as a starting point, so you can take them on the journey. Then we have wonderful things like segmentation and all the amazing data that we can collect and all the meaningful inflection points that we identify through the process of serving the audience, which just makes you better at serving the next cohort or round of people that go on the journey with you. So you start off. Um, I guess the one key thing here is a lot of people choose a topic or a niche and they're like,
mm.
well, I've narrowed this down far enough, so I'll just treat all these people the same. Major mistake, right?
Yeah.
I almost think you should start with a broader topic. Don't niche down too far and narrow by being the right mentor to a certain type of person, not all the people who might be interested in that topic, right? So, um, it's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, but that's the essence of it.
No, I think it's perfect. I think that's a great answer. And something that really stood out to me, and something I think a lot of us sorely miss, is that resistance to the call
Mm.
part of the journey, right? We go, hey, I want to show this person the light, and I want to, help them to that other side. But oftentimes we don't create content, or we don't acknowledge that there is a reason why the person doesn't want to change what they're already doing, that and the content we create has to develop or drive some sort of meaningful change.
Yeah,
And
and it
if we
goes
don't
back to what I
understand that
said.
resistance, yeah.
Yeah, what I said earlier about being overly logical and forgetting that these are emotional human beings. I mean, we're driven by belief and emotion more than
Mhm.
rationality. We just justify what we do with rationality. But it's like economics; it assumes a rational actor, and we know that's people are irrational, right?
Right.
You are, I am, we all are. And what we want is what we want, and sometimes we are the thing that stands in the way of our own success. And I think people have gotten better about that. I think people talk, not just in content marketing, but in general, talk about the reality and the messiness of human emotion and desire
Mhm.
and just dealing with life. And the great content marketer has to be a psychologist and again a sociologist, because how people behave in groups, whether that be audience or community, um, is probably the most persuasive thing we have going right now, which is unity. Robert Cialdini added to his 6 elements of influence with the 7th, and he said unity is the most powerful of all, meaning if you belong with this group of people, you're going to do what that group of people does. Now, in the political
Right.
realm right now, is it more obvious, right? Okay, but it people don't want to think, oh, well, that's politics. It's not like that and everything else. It's like that
Right.
and everything else. It's just more subtle.
Right. In some cases, not necessarily in all
Not
cases.
always, right?
Sometimes you have a third tribe. I'm just
Right.
kidding.
I mean,
Um,
sports teams, religion,
right.
politics are the ones that, jump out, but it comes down to everything. Belonging is one of those root human needs. Um, and recently I've been really going deep on this kind of stuff. And, if you look at Maslow's pyramid of need, hierarchy of needs, you got like food and shelter and security and then belonging. But the point has been made that those are all kind of intertwined because we went from hunter gatherers into tribes and then cities and nations. And so your security and your food and your shelter are all kind of intertwined with being part of belonging, right?
Hmm.
And as we've progressed more to a modern society, we've got an epidemic in loneliness and alienation. So people really want to belong. It's really strong. So I've stopped thinking about persuasion in terms of can I, the persuader, convince you to do something? No, it's more like, hey, this is what people like us do.
Right.
That's incredibly powerful.
There's a whole thing to be said, and we actually got to jump into the edit because we're running a little bit
Right.
behind on it. But there's a lot to be said there too about creating community around content, and I think that's something that Copyblogger in particular, but further, like everything that you've done so far, has really signposted to the right people. Hey, this is a place for you, and a community develops around that. That's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. Um, but I would love to talk about that at some point. Let's
Sure.
hop into the edit.
Okay.
Uh, all right, so we've got this article by Aaron Orendorf. He was one of our guest hosts from before. This is 10 e-commerce trends for 2022, growth strategies, data, and 17 experts on the future of DTC retail. Brian, first impression, first thing you do when you go into an edit, what's that look like?
Well, first of all, I need to say that it's not fair that Aaron submitted his piece. Like Aaron is a badass, right? So he's just like, oh yeah, let's see if Clark can come up with anything. I can always come up with something, but I just want to recognize Aaron is a very talented writer. Um, And he's very knowledgeable, obviously, as a subject matter expert in this space as well, which I think comes across. That said, every time I look at a document, I try to take in a first impression, much like everyone does when they come across a piece of content or a headline. You're scanning very, very quickly, and you're making a very snap judgment, usually based on psychological heuristics, about whether or not this is worth your time, right? So I try to bring that mindset of the reader to it before I start, really shifting into editor mode. So my first impression when I saw the article was, this is very substantial, both in subject matter and length. And there's some interesting dynamics that come into play here, because first thing I always look at is the headline. I spent a lot of time in the early days of Copyblogger trying to teach people to write great headlines, because it really is how most decisions are made. And then I tend to kind of scroll down before I start reading and try to get a feel for the piece. This article is incredibly long. Do we have a word count on this thing? Hold on, I could check.
It's like 8,000 words.
It's 8,000 words. Okay. Now, this is an interesting topic of discussion right here, which is, I understand why people write these monster articles, because one of the goals is SEO, right? And it's been, 15, 16 years arms race of content marketers. I remember back in the early days, it was such a phenomenon to see, all these various entrepreneurs trying to outdo each other by giving more value for free. Now that's just, again, ingrained in what content marketing is. But in the early days, it really was. And it was people like me and Rand and others, and we would just try to outdo each other, right? It's
Right.
almost like we're daring you to give away more. But that has become completely ingrained, I think, in a lot of content marketing now, even as SEO has become more competitive, more complicated, harder really to rank, and the fact that Google has taken up so much of the top of the page with paid ads that it almost doesn't matter as much unless you rank number one, right? Okay, so I understand why this article is so long, but from a strategic standpoint, if I could eliminate the SEO aspect of this, we could make this, we could strategically approach this article in a completely different way. And I think we can save that for getting a little bit deeper into the article itself. But I did want to preface that up front, because if you do take the SEO factor out of it, it could solve some of the issues that we can identify with the article. So I'm interested in what you think. I mean, when you look at a piece for the first time, is it similar, or do you just dive in and read?
Yeah, it depends on the piece, and it depends on the author. I edited Aaron for a very long time when I was at Shopify, so I know a lot of the ticks. But I mean, yeah, generally speaking, I go through and I do the scan and I read the same way everybody else reads, and then I go through and I do a first pass where I'm reading out loud. And a lot of what I look for in a certain piece is, or in pieces, and I was at Conversion XL for a long time too. So the information dense game is something that I'm very familiar with, both as a writer and as an editor, something I expect. But what I look for is breathing room between the points that are being made, right? Between the research that's being thrown out there and the quotes that are being put out there, because it can almost be too much, right? You can start to hammer home facts and data these points and like that, but it can be really dense for a reader, and that becomes very difficult to take in. So when I'm looking at long form pieces, that's one of the things that I definitely look for is like, okay, we have 8,000 words. There's probably not going to be any wasted words here, but are we giving somebody some room to think or contemplate or doing what we're looking, like absorb this information, or is it becoming completely overwhelming within a very short period of time? Because it's
Right.
exhausting. It can be exhausting. And that's one of the things that, especially as a long form editor, which is where most of my background is,
Yeah.
that's where that comes into play.
Okay, so let's start with the headline, because that is really where people are going to decide whether they're going to click or not, generally. But really almost all the time. If it's in the search results, if it's in an email newsletter, if it's on social, that's what's going to do it. So the on the page headline, 10 e-commerce trends for 2022, growth strategies, data, and 17 experts on the future of that to me is too much. And it's a jumble when it should be clear. Like, generally, on page, you want the reader friendliest headline you can get, which to me is 10 e-commerce trends for 2022, period. Interestingly, Aaron has as his SEO title, the one that only Google sees, as 10 e-commerce trends for 2022 growth in DTC's future. So I wonder if we couldn't break out growth strategies, data, and 17 experts on the future of DTC retail, because that's useful information, but it may be too much. Like if I read 10 e-commerce trends for 2022, now I'm not in the I'm not in the e-commerce space, but I am very into trends in internet business overall. It's literally a big aspect of my job now to pay attention to. So I would conceivably still be interested in this article, even though I'm not in the industry. So you would catch my attention just with the 10 e-commerce trends for, that are current for this year, maybe carve out the rest of it into a subhead. I don't know. I just feel that is bogging me down unnecessarily when all the purpose of a headline is to get them to read the next line and the first sentence and keep going from there, right? Classic copywriting strategy. So that's my first thing.
It's funny, Aaron actually, he's said almost the exact same thing, and I've talked to him plenty of times over this. Now, 10 e-commerce trends for 2022. Now, I know the reason why this has so much more to it is that alone as a headline could fall flat. What would your recommendation be to sort of give that a little bit more oomph without it just being so on the nose?
A little bit of a modifier to it to, again, it's a copywriting thing more than it's substantive, but again, that's how people work. So 10 e-commerce trends for 2022 that actually matter might actually just give you that little jab, right? Especially if you are in the industry and you've seen it all, read it all, blah, blah, blah. You think you know it all. And then someone comes at you and says, look, there's a lot of noise out there. I'm going to tell you what you need to know in a meaningful way. Things like that can really make a difference. So again, I think getting to the heart of the matter, which again is what he's trying to communicate to Google anyway, and then add a little bit of flourish there that creates the spark of intrigue or curiosity that says, all right, I'm gonna start reading because you're telling me that this is something that matters to me, perhaps more than other content that I've already consumed on this topic.
I love that. All right, moving forward.
Now we get to the opening, which is the second most important part to getting people to keep going with reading. And he's got this very, very kind of dramatic biblical take here, and I like it. Again, I'm not in this space, so I don't know. I'm not intimately familiar with the personas or archetypes that you would be writing for, but Aaron does know these people, so I'm going to go with that. So he's got the demon goes by many names. And again, if you're going to be dramatic, there are times where the structure of your opening can emphasize or add to that drama. And in other times, when you don't have that element of I'm going to tell you a story that without saying that, um, this might not work as well. For example, some people will use one sentence paragraphs way too much when it doesn't matter. To me, as a copywriter, again, that's a form of emphasis, like bold or italics, except it's just designed to say, you really need to focus on this sentence. And I don't want to drown it out. In a longer paragraph. So if you're going to have a dramatic opening, or in openings in general, especially when you're leading with a metaphor or a story, go ahead and go with that one sentence opening, right? I'm doing this in the document right now. The demon goes by many names, and then he's got a colon and goes on to name the demons. And I think his third sentence, which is a standalone sentence, each a stone at the entrance of what was and no longer shall be, make that the second sentence, another standalone, right? So you've definitely you're right in someone's head right now. And if Aaron has calculated correctly that this is going to be enticing to this target audience, then you've really got them. Don't go halfway if you're going to go with this kind of play, right? And then the third sentence becomes, some of them are called e-commerce reckoning, exit purgatory, Amazon arbitrage, the customer acquisition pricing parade. So I'm saying if you're going with drama, go all in, up the drama, right? And then he adds some background. Roughly 15 years ago, the first disciples of DTC began spreading the word of blah, 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 blah. Then he's got 3 bullets, solid. Again, if you're going to get someone through the opening into the meat of the article, it's got to be scannable while also forcing you into it. And I think openings are a critical aspect. Tommy, I know you know this, and I think Aaron knows this, obviously, because of the way he chose to go into this. And he goes so far after 2 more one-sentence paragraphs to a biblical quote from Mark 5:9. I mean, come on. If you're going to go that way, go all in on it. I like it. I really do. Again, I can't comment on the target audience because I don't know them, but Aaron does. And I just think he's on a track here that he just needs to go all in on. And that's my advice on the opening, so that his point, that he wants to call nonsense about other e-commerce predictions, right? Which ties right back into my recommendation for adding a little spice to the end of the headline, trends that matter, as opposed to, without saying it, the nonsense of some other e-commerce predictions, right?
I love that. Very often too, we talk about like the first subhead connecting to the headline, but you're and it makes sense. You're kind of adding to that, the headline really connecting to that single word that's in there, right? Actually matters. Nonsense.
Remember, if you're trying to go, the headline's only there to get them to read the opening. The opening's only there to get them to read the rest. If there's a thematic congruency that quickly, you tend to keep people.
Yep. John Morrow would used to say, sweater knit copy, right? One sentence can't exist without the one before it. It's very similar to that.
Absolutely. John's a very smart man.
Cool. All right, moving forward.
Okay, so then I start to get a little, okay, then he lists the actual 10 trends. And, just basically not even a full sentence for each one, but I do like that approach. And then this is where I get confused. He's got an image of a video on YouTube. Is this supposed to be an embedded video? Because it's the same. Well, it says 10 e-commerce trends you must know in 2022 backed by data. Why is this here? Is this a video he wants people to watch? Do you know?
I think so. I think so. I think it's the video
Okay, so
version of the
effectively
article.
that's a call to action right at the beginning of your article to take them out of the article. Now, if the goal is to get YouTube views, then okay, but I don't think it is given the length of this article. So, and the fact that there is a content upgrade right below it. So that's another call to action, right? So that, you know, again, my fundamental rule is you have one action you want people to take. And to me, I think that would generally be the content upgrade, right? Especially with an article this dense, as we'll get into. But okay, so I don't know. Aaron may be able to tell us later on Twitter or something about the video. I'm not sure about that. I don't understand that. But that, to me, you have to figure out what you want people to really do. So when I saw this content upgrade, which is basically giving them a PDF of the article that they can save and and look through later, I would imagine in exchange for an email address, which of course, solid strategy. But a lot of times PDFs end up on the desktop or in a download folder and they never get looked at. So this is more of a strategic thing than an editing thing, but to me, they're both the same because a good editor understands what you're trying to accomplish with the piece and then makes suggestions or edits that accomplish that better. So if you didn't have to worry about SEO, which I think Aaron does, but let's at least just talk about this because, you know, to me, rule number one is if I can get an email address, Google can rank whoever they want, right? You know, because my only reason to rank well is to get people to the site to get them on an email list, right? So I would put the content upgrade as my objective, as my primary objective. I wouldn't have the video if that's in fact what that's supposed to represent. But what I might do with these 10 e-commerce trends, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, just basically the subheads or the title of the trend itself, I might write a shorter article that gives the gist in one paragraph of all 10 things and lead directly to the content upgrade and say, for a more detailed analysis, download our 2022 e-commerce trends that matter PDF. And all of a sudden, you've got an article that exists to give you a taste and entice you with the bullet point, or more than bullet point, but brief insights of each trend, and then prompting the opt-in in exchange for an email address to download the full report. Because, you know, this is some heavy reading. It really is. And I know you made the same comment. So it may be, if we think about our objectives outside of SEO, to go much briefer, still give a taste of each trend. But if you want all this extensive detail that Aaron does so well with the graphics and elaboration and examples, why not make that the content upgrade? What do you think about that, Tommy?
I think it makes sense. It leads to a bunch of different questions for me, and it's just kind of content marketing nowadays type thing. Aaron's very good with the SEO side of things. I've worked with Aaron for many, many years now, and it always surprises me how well, hold on a second. I'm like, how well the stuff that he's able to create ranks and how quickly and like all of that. The question,
and again, if that's the primary objective, the goal, to rank, then yeah. And then once you do rank, you might be able to then manipulate and edit the article and the content upgrade in a different fashion, right? Or you could
Right.
come out of the gate that way, right? I mean,
The question that I always have though, nowadays especially, is what's the distribution outside of SEO, right? What
exactly.
Slack channels are we going to get this into? How are we going to get this shared with internal email newsletters? Like, and that's to me where content now, not this piece, but as a whole, like Google,
Well, you could have
a
a
lot of the
two-pronged
positions in
strategy here.
Google's,
You could have
yeah,
this article for Google, got the
yep,
content upgrade in there. I might change the lead into it to entice the opt-in before they even try to read.
yeah,
Basically saying you're going to want this is good. This is a long read. It's very meaty. You're going to want to save this. Go ahead and do that right now. Just a little bit of, again, adding a little bit of copywriting finesse in there to get that action. Because again, in my mind, you only want to rank well in Google to get traffic that you get on a list that becomes part of the audience, not drive-by traffic, right?
right,
That makes it about halfway through and they're like, oh my God, I don't have time for 8,000 words. And then they're just gone, right?
right,
So but so this is an idea I had also, which is with a do not crawl aspect to it, create a different version of the article that goes into social and email newsletters and whatnot. That primarily is the opening and the summary of the trends and the opt-in, right? Oh, well,
right.
it wouldn't be an opt-in if they're already on the list, but it could be a segmentation opportunity at that point that they did click the button to get the upgrade, applies a tag, what have you.
Right. I think that's great. I think nowadays I'm just completely at odds with Google in general nowadays. I don't know what to think anymore.
I
I
know.
have no idea what's going on. Like
And you're good at SEO. I mean,
I'm
that's a big part of
okay.
your I thought you were, yeah, okay. I mean,
I'm
it
all
was a
right.
big deal to me in the early days.
Yeah.
And I don't think about it all that much now.
Yeah.
Um, Although I am a co-owner in a content marketing agency and they do that for me. But other than that, I, but it's not where my head is at. I'm really,
Right.
really focused on email as everyone should be. So
Yeah, I mean, and I say this a lot. Anybody who's been watching this show for a little while, Ryan Law over at Animals, he has this great article about second mover advantage. And one of the things he says, it's like looking at Google is like looking into the night sky, right? Where the light you get from the stars is coming from thousands of years ago, and what you're seeing in Google, right, is stuff that's been there for a very long time. And
yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at with when I say I'm at odds with it. It's kind of like, you know, is that really the best way to go about things anymore? I'm the worst person to talk to about this because
No, I don't think you're off base, because
yeah,
again, I've got a really solid background in it. I can recognize Aaron's
yeah,
skills. It's like you got to do this to have
yeah,
a shot at ranking, right? Um,
yeah,
but the question is, what's the ROI on that ultimately, and what is really driving your revenue, right? Is it the
yeah.
email subscriber? Are you converting from Google to email subscribers? Um, so we've kind of gotten into philosophy more in this part than we did in the first part of the conversation, but it's important because that's how you have to think about these things.
We do have to wrap it up, but I think what Aaron does really well, and I think that this is something that's important and kind of sums up what you're saying in this moment too, is that what I know Aaron does very well is building in those retention triggers afterwards. It's not just about this piece; it's about what's going to happen in the follow up and how he's going to
Sure.
hook you
Right.
forward, like moving forward and going on. Like in
Absolutely.
as
It has to be.
in as long as you have that, right, thinking beyond just the single piece that we're looking at right now, but looking at the bigger strategy, and this is for editors and content leads, gotta think bigger picture. What's that retention strategy going to look like? What's the first email that goes out after this? The second one, like what's that story that's going to happen after they see
Especially if
this?
they opt in, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. Because are people going to read an 8,000 word article on a search? Maybe, maybe not. Aaron knows probably that it's not going to all happen right away. I know that.
Yeah, right.
So,
Well, and
what's
here's
going to
one thing I
happen
want to
next?
interject here because it gets very tactical. And again, I'm not saying I know more of Aaron than to think this applies to him. But again, even for people who are just like, I just want the email address, that's not the whole thing either. Because the
Right.
beauty of content marketing is if they actually digest the content, that's part of the journey.
Right.
It's not just getting the email address unless your entire strategy begins at that point and you're able to educate them with stuff they actually will read, right?
Right.
But when it comes to trends, trends are very important, especially as fast moving as things are now. If they don't understand the fundamentals of where we're at in 2022, they may not be well equipped to accept your offer, whatever that may be down the line, right? So again, you're right, and I'm pretty sure Aaron's thinking about this. And again, this is a problem because I immediately went to overall strategy instead of just being an editor because that's what
That's
I
the
do.
point. No. That's the goal. I mean, the show is for content leads. So
Yeah.
that's exactly like what we're like, that's perfectly fine. I think we really got to wrap it up. We're going over.
Okay.
But something with this that's interesting to me is like you have this trends, which is a really great jumping off point for an email list that gives you up-to-date trends as you're
Right.
going along. It's the beginning of the conversation, not just the beginning
Absolutely.
of, hey, I've got your email address now.
And that may well be why Aaron's trying to rank
Yeah.
for it because it is the top of the funnel.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. All right. So 30-second wrap up here. Tell me a little bit, sum it all up for us. Give me the sound bite to close it off, and then we'll call it a night.
Wow. Well, it's interesting again that Aaron submitted a piece on trends because really, if you look at the course of my career and the dozen or so businesses, it's always been sparked by change that kind of led to a counter mainstream trend or movement, if you will. And this was something I didn't realize until I took a sabbatical after being on just a hardcore, what was it, 13-year run there before I took a meaningful break. And I was able to review my career, and I'm like, it's always the new thing that gives you purpose that coincides with the audience, their sense of purpose and their desired outcome, their success, right? And I realized I'd been intuitively doing that. I was never like this overt trend follower, even though I was a hardcore researcher. And I think that's another thing that a lot of people who got into content marketing have in common, which is they're curious and they're constantly keeping up with things and they're asking why. And when you get to the why, that's where you start identifying your purpose. And then you spot an audience of like-minded people, and then you're off and running. So that's a big focus of what I've tried to teach people now, which is, what's the thing that's meaningful in this era of rapid change and the anxiety that comes with it that you can make people feel better about, right? To where they can see the change as an opportunity instead of a threat to their livelihood. Because there's a lot of that going on right now. I mean, and it's not going to get better. So be a shepherd, be a mentor. You'll succeed.
I love it. Thank you so much, Brian, for coming on. I really appreciate it. This has been an incredibly insightful session. Thank you for the time. Anybody who's watching this, if you want to watch the replay, that's going to be going up on YouTube sometime tomorrow. We'll also be sending that out in the email. And thank you so much again. Have a great night, everybody.